Well, good evening. Phil Andrew here, speaking from Nigeria. Sorry, Jan and I can't join you tonight at the visuals evening, but I would like to at least tell you a little bit about a walk that I did back in 2010 in December. A walk in the Labyrinth is what I've entitled it, so I hope you enjoy my description of what we're able to do at that time. This just shows you a map of where we're headed, in case you're not entirely sure where the Labyrinth is. We left Launceston and headed down to Derwent Bridge onto Lake St Clair, and then caught the first ferry up to Narcissus Hut, where the beginning of the walk occurred. And here you see the more detailed map of our first day's walk, beginning at Narcissus Hut, up along the overland track towards Windy Ridge Hut, and then the track junction to Pine Valley. We head off up there. We had lunch in Pine Valley, and then in the afternoon across and up onto the DuCane range to the Labyrinth area, and then headed out to Walled Mountain, where our first day's campsite was to be. Pine Valley Hut, many of you would know very well, but it's a picture of it here for those who don't. And for me, it was my first visit to Pine Valley, so I very much enjoyed the opportunity to see this. I'd always wanted to go there, and the chance came. So this was where we had lunch. It was a wet day, as you can probably see by the wet weather gear hanging up there. It was nice to have a little bit of respite for lunch, and then in the afternoon the rain slowly eased off and the sun came out, and it ended up to be quite a nice day. We headed off in the afternoon up, climbing up onto the range, and as you emerge onto the Labyrinth area, this is one of the first lakes to be seen in the distance. That's Long Lake, looking down into the valley. You can see the clouds around the neighbouring peaks, which are slowly rising, lifting as the afternoon goes on. Many tarns and lakes up there, some are named, some are not. This is just one little tarn, and some of the vegetation around it with the Parthenon off to the right. Sian Lake is one of the bigger ones further down that we walked around. The main track follows around this and turns off to the left to head out towards Walled Mountain. In the distance is the Acropolis, and we'll often see photos of this during this presentation. It seemed to be almost always there, looming in the distance, off to the east of us, of the Labyrinth. There's another view of it from one of the other small tarns there. Lake Ophion is next to Sian Lake, and again we see the Acropolis, this time with Geryon South and Jerian North next to it, and one of the many beautiful views of those peaks that you get as you walk in between these lakes. Lots of rock formations and lichen like this one to be seen, and yet another tarn, this time with the Minotaur in the background. That's a peak a little bit further to the south of us. Many pandanus to be seen as we head towards Walled Mountain, once again with the Acropolis in the distance behind them. We camped at Walled Mountain that night, and up on the plateau just below the high point. Our plan for the next day was to head out to Mount Nereus, which is out to the west, going past Max Mountain first, and then the plan was to get to Nereus, come back and camp again at Walled Mountain that night. However, that was not to be. We realised we'd underestimated the time that was going to be needed to get to Mount Nereus. The rock scree that we found ourselves scrambling over was much bigger and icier and more slippery than we'd anticipated. The distances were also quite a lot longer than anticipated, so it became clear with worse weather being forecast for the next day that it wasn't going to be possible for us to get out and back that day, and that it would be better to abort our plans to get to Nereus and instead schedule it for another time. So we turned around, came back to our campsite for lunch, packed up and headed off back down into the Labyrinth proper, off to the Pool of Memories for our second night's camp. So early that morning, an attempt to Nereus, Max Mountain in the distance, that we're headed towards. You can see all the ice on the ground, on the cushion plants. Ahead of me is Robert Seaton, one of my walking partners, and Terry Brain in the distance. There was the other one. There were three of us altogether. Both Robert and Terry have walked on a few boots and all walks over the years. Some of you would know them, and I walk with them quite a lot. You can see the clouds surrounding us in all directions in the valleys. Quite a beautiful, eerie experience. Mount Ossa and Mount Thetis off to the north of us as we walked along Walled Mountain. The Guardians off to the south, and then ahead of us Max Mountain, which was getting closer, but unfortunately not fast enough. Quite a big rock scramble, lots of icy rocks. West Pelion and Mount Ossa again to the north of us as we walk along the plateau, and behind us you could look back to see Mount Hyperion as well, which would be our destination for a day or two later. Another view of the Guardians taken from the rock scree. As we came back to our campsite, it was warming up, the sun was out, the cloud had lifted, and this is the Walled Mountain Plateau near where we were camped. Lots of beautiful pools, a lovely plateau to walk around. And Terry and Robert heading off ahead of me back to the campsite. Much scaparia to be seen at that time of the year, being December, beginning to flower in places, particularly on Walled Mountain. Lots of small pools and cushion plants and beautiful vegetation. This is from Walled Mountain, and then Hyperion is to be seen in the distance. Some quite steep drops off down into the valley below as we head towards the high point on Walled Mountain. Again, Acropolis and Jerian in the distance. And here is the cairn on the top of Walled Mountain. Quite a flattened, open final approach to the high point, but beautiful views in all directions. This is Mount Gould and the Guardians to the south. And then again Geryon and the Acropolis more to the east as we start heading down from Walled Mountain. You can see the Labyrinth in the distance, all those lakes that we'll be walking among later in the day, and that's all part of the Labyrinth that we're headed into. Again, Mount Hyperion and Eros just this side of it. And then as we head down, more waratahs to be seen, again being December, time for waratahs, and there were quite a few on Walled Mountain. Some beautiful tarns and lakes once again. This one doesn't have a name, but it's there on the Labyrinth, and in the distance the Minotaur. This one is Lake Alicia, which we skirt around to the north as we head towards our campsite, again with the Acropolis in the distance. Another one of Lake Alicia with the Minotaur in the distance this time, or to the south. This is the Pool of Memories, our destination for our second day's campsite. A beautiful spot, and just a lovely area to camp. We were to camp there for the next 3 nights, so it was good to find a nice spot. Quite waterlogged and wet underfoot, but nevertheless very comfortable, and we're able to enjoy the sunset as the evening wore on. The next day the weather was, as predicted, quite windy and wet. Not really a day for heading up to Mount Hyperion and other high peaks, so it was either stay in the tent and experience the wet weather all day, or try and find something to do. So we were surrounded by tarns and lakes, so it was a lake crawl we're going to do that day. So we began from our Pool of Memories and headed off to Lake Selene, then to Lake Eos, then to Lake Hermes, then down to Lake Tartarius, and then up to Lake Persephone and back to camp. So these are just some of the views of some of these lakes. It was a dull day, intermittent drizzle and a lot of wind. Lake Selene, and surrounded by all kinds of beautiful tarns. Lake Eos, another one further around, and then we come to once again the Acropolis looming in the background. Despite the rain, we're able to get views of it from time to time. This is still Lake Eos area. We come around now to Lake Hermes with Minotaur in the background. We had to skirt around that lake to the right here, and then as we come around another view of Lake Hermes. And then we head down to Lake Titarius, down below Walled Mountain. This was the lowermost lake of the day. And I think that's where we had lunch. And then we headed back up past a little waterfall towards Lake Persephone, back towards our campsite. There's Lake Persephone, once again Geryon and the Acropolis in the distance. Get back to our campsite. The next day was a much nicer day, and we head up to back along the main Labyrinth track up towards Lake Helios, and then to Mount Eros and Mount Hyperion, and then later in the afternoon down to Jerian North and back to camp. That's the plan for the day. This is Lake Helios with Mount Hyperion behind it, and another beautiful lake, East Pelion, you can see there in the distance. So Lake Helios, that's with Robert off to the right. And as we turn around now and head towards Mount Eros, which is this mountain behind the lake. And there we are on the top of Mount Eros with the Minotaur in the background. That's Terry and Robert, and just to prove that I actually did get there. And that's Walled Mountain, the site of our earlier campsite in the distance. Again, the Minotaur and the Guardians can be seen from Mount Eros to the south. And Max Mountain and Mount Nereus right off to the right, which was the elusive peak that we weren't able to get to a day or two before. And looking back to Mount Hyperion, which was the next destination for the day, we did actually head up towards it exactly as you might have wanted to, along that ridge that you can see. It turned out to be a big mistake because we could not get to the top. There was an enormous drop that was not crossable, so we had to come back down and skirt around, by which time I'd had enough. Here is Robert on the rocks, lots of rocks on Mount Hyperion. I was feeling pretty tired, so I decided to wait it out while Robert and Terry skirt around the other side to get to the high point of Hyperion. So I guess a year spent in Nigeria without bushwalking had taken its toll on my Tasmanian walking fitness. So Terry and Robert did make it to the top. I went down to the saddle between the two and had a relaxed hour or two, having a nice long lunch and waiting for them to come back. This is Mount Hyperion, which they had gone up around the back to scale and come back again safely. Now we head off towards Jerian in the afternoon. There's some nice steep chutes between the steep rock faces to get down the valley if you wanted to, but long way down. From Jerian North, looking down towards Jerian South and Acropolis once again. And then swinging around, you can see Walled Mountain and the Labyrinth itself off to the west. And then more to the east, we've got Mount Massif and Falling Mountain and Castle Crag. So quite spectacular views from North Jerian. Then as we come back to camp, again Geryon and the Acropolis off in the distance as we come back, heading down towards the Pool of Memories. So our fifth day is our last one, and it's a straightforward walk out from the campsite down to Pine Valley and off to Lake St Clair and the Narcissus Hut. Once again, more tarns, this one near Lake Alicia as we skirted around a little bit off track trying to have an alternative route back. Lake Ophion in the distance, the one that we'd seen a few days earlier. Quite a misty, wettish day that day. Sian Lake again as we come past it for the last time. And that concludes our walk in the Labyrinth. A great time, and unfortunately I have to go back again, or perhaps fortunately I should say, I need to go back again sometime to get to Mount Nereus. But it was a beautiful experience and a lovely part of the world. So thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this taste of the Labyrinth all the way from Nigeria.